Mad Catholic is created by ordinary people with deep faith and lots of questions, so we all can unbox our faith. Now, here's your host, Kelly Worth. And today's special guest, Kate McElwee.
When a person or institution won't allow you a voice, how do you respond? It's normal to feel angry, but most of us eventually understand that righteous outrage, while inevitable in the face of injustice, is a pivot point rather than a place to build a home. Even we at Mad Catholic know that just being mad is not a durable strategy for effective change. But say you've invested your heart and soul into a cause, a culture, or a church. All your life, that powerful group rules that you are somehow unfit to speak, hold particular offices, weigh in on certain decisions, receive a sacrament, or perform some functions simply because you are a woman or non-binary. How do you stand with grace and dignity in the face of that exclusion? Of course, leaving the group is an option. But what if God lays it on your heart to stay and work? How do you show respect for a tradition and preserve what you hold dear as you advocate boldly and openly for justice and change? My guest today is a faithful Catholic woman of bold dignity and action who does just that. She works constructively on the edges of and within an ancient patriarchal system that has historically excluded women, not only from many decision-making roles, but also from ordination as deacons, priests, and bishops. I deeply appreciate her patient hard work for justice and gender equity in the Roman Catholic Church. Kate McElwee currently serves as the executive director of the Women's Ordination Conference, where she has worked since 2011. Kate also serves on the leadership circle of Women's Ordination Worldwide, WOW. She is a respected activist and advocate for gender equity in the Catholic Church, and her work is frequently featured in international media outlets including the BBC, AP, The New Yorker, and the National Catholic Reporter. Kate is a graduate of Mount Holyoke College, earning a degree in religion, and holds an MA in International Human Rights Law from SOAS in London. Founded in 1975, the Women's Ordination Conference, WOC, is the oldest and largest organization working to ordain women as deacons, priests, and bishops into an inclusive and accountable Roman Catholic Church. A feminist voice for women in the Roman Catholic Church, WOC is a grassroots-driven movement that promotes activism, dialogue, and prayerful witness to call for women's full equality in the Church. I'm honored to welcome you, Kate, to Mad Catholic. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you, Kelly. It's so great to be with you. Thank you for that beautiful introduction.
It is an honor. I've been looking forward to having some personal time with you. I did first become aware of you in my own discernment, and then OC was so inspiring to me as I pondered and prayed. So thank you again for all you do. I gave a little introduction about Women's Ordination Conference, but would you tell how you got involved with WOC?
I started working for the Women's Ordination Conference in 2011. It was a time right after I had my master's degree in human rights law. In college, I had studied religion, mainly with a focus in Buddhism, but in my last semester, I really started exploring my own tradition, which was Catholicism. And somehow it came at the right time. It held all of my interests of women's rights, spiritual activism, and this question of Catholicism that I had ignored for many years. I was raised Catholic, and my family's Catholic. I always considered it, I like to say it was like a brooch, like an ugly family heirloom that I would bring out around holidays and then put back after grandma had seen it or whoever. But in my time at Mount Holyoke and studying different religious traditions, I studied abroad in India, and I was really interested in Tibetan Buddhism. And if any of your listeners follow the Dalai Lama, they know that he says very clearly, don't leave your spiritual home, just incorporate mindfulness and loving kindness and meditation into your own tradition. Then while I was in India, I had many experiences that were so familiar to me. Bad monks, predatory monks, uneven laws applied to women and men. It was very different than my women's college religious studies class. I was like, wait a minute, I know what this is. This is patriarchy. And so I went back after my study abroad and really delved into feminist theology and my own tradition. And I found that was a place where I had a voice. I was always compelled to just why people took action for social justice driven by their faith. And so I learned much more about the social justice tradition of our Catholic faith. I learned about centering prayer. All of these things were part of our tradition that really weren't shared with me in my Catholic upbringing. And so I incorporated those all into my life today. And in 2011, there was just an opportunity to start working for the Women's Ordination Conference. And I told my mom at the time, and she was like, oh, you're Catholic again now. And I said, once a Catholic, always a Catholic. But it snuck back in the back door and had to really learn to live my faith in this new way. I encountered women priests for the first time. I started reading. I just received so much information and care from the progressive, so to speak, Catholic community. And it really empowered me to be able to live my faith in an authentic way, which is to fight against injustice, to stand up for women, and to be one of those social justice driven activists who are fighting the good fight in a nonviolent way to bring about gender justice in my own tradition. It was a longer journey, but I've been with the Women's Ordination Conference now this is my 14th year with the organization, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's such a blessing to be able to meet and work with and be ministered to by women called to priesthood, and to work with really committed people who are navigating really oppressive structures and finding ways to live their faith and flourish in their faith around that. And I find that this position really helps me share the gifts that I have and amplify the gifts of people around me. So I love creating colorful, bold witnesses, thinking how to be a skillful activist, how to really do it. I love an underdog fight. So this speaks to my heart. But also, I get to amplify women who are called to priesthood, who have been marginalized. I get to work with incredible people sharing their gifts, especially liturgically. The Women's Ordination Conference creates great platforms for retreats, women-led liturgies, Taizé prayers. I just received so many blessings through this work, and it's very affirming to be part of it.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. I related so much to your movement of your spiritual journey, how you're Catholic. I actually converted 24 years ago. I grew up Lutheran and converted, and you know how converts are. We're just, yeah, it's all great. It's all wonderful. And then you start swimming in the reality and understanding things a little better. And I didn't totally drift out, but I did a lot of exploring of how am I going to be a strong woman with a voice in a church like this as it is now. And so I appreciate what you're saying, but then also that realization that patriarchy is everywhere. It isn't just in the church. This is what we as women deal with every day.
Yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, it's patriarchy is everywhere. And the Roman Catholic Church is one of the biggest patriarchies in the world. And so it just feels very relevant. And this work could truly transform. I know it sounds kind of pie in the sky or Pollyanna, but it would truly transform the world if we were able to dismantle and transform this incredibly damaging patriarchy. Yeah, it's so vital.
I completely agree with you. I think that the church has, in the past and in the present, has such power over the way people think about gender roles. And I know I've had to deal with that personally. There's a sense of how we should be submissive, how we should conduct ourselves, whether we are equipped for leadership. Even the sanctity of our bodies is always questioned. So, from your point of view, can you help our viewers understand how the history of the Catholic Church is playing into these current questions? I know John Paul II said we shouldn't even be talking about whether women should be ordained priests. But what are some of the challenges that we are facing in terms of women's progress toward ordination?
Yeah, I'm not a historian. I'll say that right away. I'm an activist and an advocate. But this year, we're marking the 30th anniversary of John Paul II's document, Ordinatio Sacerdotales. This is an apostolic letter that came out in 1994 that basically said this conversation is closed and relied very heavily on the argument that because Jesus was a man and the priest stands in persona Christi, only men can be ordained. And that document
Right.
has such a chilling legacy in two generations of the Catholic Church. And I think it amounts to nothing short of spiritual violence. It has suppressed theological thought. It has punished and marginalized women who are called to priesthood and those who advocate for it. And it just has really shut down healthy dialogue in the Catholic Church. So this is a legacy that we live in because when the Women's Ordination Conference was founded in 1975, this question of women's ordination was very alive. The first conference took place in Detroit, Michigan. 1,200 people came. And this was a moment where really women were preparing. They were watching their Episcopal sisters be ordained. They were ready, getting their degrees, preparing for that moment when they would be ordained. And so over several decades, the door kept closing on them. And so, especially in this 1994 document, it was very stifling. It was a shock. And I think it doesn't hold true to the sensus fidei at the time and especially now, but it had created a real taboo around women's ordination. And so, particularly in the papacy of Pope Francis, where he's encouraging so much dialogue, this document still stands, and it really creates an incongruity with the church that we are growing into as a synodal church. So I think we're reckoning with the legacy of this very damaging document that attempted to suppress the Holy Spirit. And that's not possible. Our organization continued work is a witness that this document has no weight, but it has stifled theological thought, dialogue, and really marginalized the work that we do. There's a stigma attached to women's ordination to the priesthood. We're not invited to all the tables. The doors are closed to us. And so that's a reason we have to be even more creative on the margins. But the church has really suffered because of this gag order, this taboo of women's ordination to the priesthood.
It's my impression, too, that it has provided ammunition to those who would stand up and, whether it's in a comment to Mad Catholic Podcast or some other forum, to call us heretics, to call us apostates, to say that we are defying church law, even by discussing it. So that does make it harder. It's also forced many women who feel called to ordination into a sort of faithful but parallel existence in the church, where you are out on that limit, loving what Catholicism brings, and yet feeling like an outcast.
Yeah, we like to call it the prophetic edge. Yes, it forces women to the prophetic edge. It's so against the teachings of Jesus, who clearly ministered to the marginalized and included all at the table. It is very hard to square with our Catholic faith, and yet it's given so much primacy when it comes to the question of women.
And historically, I know that we women working for ordination are also looking for the images of women deacons and possibly women priests, try and help people understand that this image of priesthood we have now is something that evolved with the agenda of keeping women in a certain role in the church. People don't want to hear that, but I think it's an important aspect of history to be specific about these things that happened. I'm not a historian either, but I have learned a lot since I started on this journey. Would you say that the challenge now in helping the church embrace the idea of women's ordination is theological? Or is there a strong political component, or is it just that we've always done it this way? Which do you feel like you're fighting the hardest?
That's a really good question. So we were recently holding a listening session with our members, and a woman who has been a chaplain for 20 years shared a very moving story about a family who had a a family member who was dying. She was there with the family. She called the priests who had been there a couple of weeks ago to do an anointing. And he said, I was just there. What do they want me to do? To sit by their bedside while he dies? And this woman said, yes, that is exactly what the family wants you to do. And he said, I can't do that. So the woman said, I will do that. And I am going to tell them that you are unwilling to do that. So she provided that ministry to this family, but the family themselves were confused as why the male priest wouldn't be there for their family. They were not familiar with women chaplains. Culturally, that was a challenge for this family. And so she reflected that there's resistance on both sides, not only in spaces where men are seen as given more authority, there's still the Catholic imagination has to be expanded to really recognize that women can and are providing these ministries, but also on the clerical side, that women's leadership and ministries have been so suppressed that these are equal barriers for us. I think the biggest resistance is that we have always done it this way, the status quo. It's not just a failure of imagination, it's a conditioned sexism of male clergy and a system that rewards following the rules. So the people who are elevated into higher positions within the hierarchy are company men. They have walked the line. Even though there are good people in this system, there's no reason to deviate from the path that rewards you and your power. And so it really takes a lot of courage and an open heart to be able to see that this system is excluding and stepping on more than half the Catholic Church. So I think that's probably the biggest barrier. And the Catholic Church itself prizes tradition. And so if we have done this for so many years, then that's how it should be. That's a huge barrier, not just in moving the Vatican machinery, but also in the hearts and minds of Catholics who expect certain symbols and certain leaders and are also conditioned in clericalism.
I don't think it can be said enough that there really are a lot of male priests who believe in women's potential to be good priests and who would support ordination. But they really are in this system, as you said, that rewards following, that has been shown to be very punitive if those men speak out and support women's causes. It's a big challenge all around, but that's why what you're doing is so important, because it gets people thinking about it, imagining it, breaking some of those habits. Well, we have to think about it this way because that's how it's always been. Even just getting people to see women priests in action. They may be angry when they see it, they may disagree with it, but they've seen it and you can't unsee it. So Pope Francis, I have such a love for Pope Francis. I want to say that up front. But how he is with these questions around gender. He seems so loving and pastoral.
Yeah, it's hard to really know what's in his prayer and mind about this. I think over his papacy, we have seen incredible developments with Pope Francis on the question of women. For the National Catholic Reporter, I wrote an article for his 10-year papacy anniversary, and I tracked some of the developments over 10 years. He made incredible strides in including women in the management of the Vatican. It's not hard to double your numbers when there's so few, but he has really included women in bigger ways at the Vatican, including changing the apostolic constitution of the Vatican, opening positions that were previously reserved for cardinals or ordained men, open to any lay person. And so in those ways, it's incredible. Women are voting now for the first time at the Vatican. That's a campaign that the Women's Ordination Conference started in 2016. It's just incredible to see the grassroots movement have a success that we can really celebrate, that there's no turning back from. Women now vote at synods. And so those are incredible changes at the management level of the Vatican. Pope Francis is still limited in his experience and encounters with women who have discerned sincere calls to priesthood. I think that is one of my great hopes, that during his papacy, he is able to really dialogue with women who have discerned their call to priesthood and are longing to share their gifts through ordained ministry with the church. I think that when he's been confronted by this question, which when I was looking back at his papacy, it's literally every year a journalist has asked, what about women priests? So this is a question that's very much on the hearts and minds of Catholics around the world. But he has stayed very true to Pope John Paul II's script that this is impossible, or he refers back to these outdated metaphors of the Marian and Petrine principles, that the church is a woman and the priest. So it's very, very outdated and reductionary metaphors that don't value women in an equal way. And so to me, you could read that in several ways. As activists and strategists, you could say that he isn't willing to change his thinking, or he hasn't been confronted enough to change his thinking. But I do think that he's open to learning. And we've learned in the past few months that his advisory body, the C9, this group of cardinals that meets with him, are having experts, women, come and talk to the group about the Marian and Petrine principles. An Episcopal Anglican bishop, a woman came and spoke about her ministry. So there is a willingness to gather information, at least. And so I hope that as he calls us all to be transformed by encounter and to accompany one another, I hope that he's transformed by these testimonies and is willing to continue that journey. But it is hard when you see him be so pastoral on issues of social justice, on climate change, on against war, and yet he seems to fall short when it comes to the real lives of women. I think he often refers to women as metaphor rather than real people with real lives. So there's a ways to go, but I do think that he is trying, he's receptive to the calls that he's able to hear. I hope he hears more of those calls.
I hope so too. And he does seem open to being transformed by people's stories. So as you said, I think if he could sit and listen to women talk about their call, their vocation, and their readiness, it might help him be able to see, as you said, women as actual humans in persona Christi instead of just as metaphors. It seems the door is open a crack, though, at this point, as far as women and the diaconate. I know that has been brought up at the Synod. Is that correct? Would you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the conversation of women in ministry has really crescendoed through the synodal process, which started in 2021. There have been regional listening sessions, national, continental, and then we had a session at the Vatican last October. This question of women in greater leadership and ministry roles echoed throughout the world. We at the Women's Ordination Conference tracked any positive mention of women's ordination to the diaconate or the priesthood in the US, and it was nearly every diocese. The US Bishop's summary report called it a matter of justice, that it was not just a response to a pastoral crisis, but it was a matter of justice that women be ordained into the priesthood and the diaconate. And so it was very much a present question at the Synod in October last year. And so through those conversations, there's a strong lobby for women deacons that's come through. There is a lobby for women deacons because there is a biblical precedent that women were deacons in the early church. So that has become a strong voice. And I know that Pope Francis and the Synod team, the Synod office in Rome, have created a third study commission on women deacons. And this has been a recurring theme throughout his papacy, but it seems to be really taking off at this moment. At the Women's Ordination Conference, we consider the diaconate an incomplete step towards women's equality. And we are concerned about a separate, unequal blessing that would keep women in a very subservient role. And so our advocacy for women deacons is really as ordained deacons. Certainly women are called to be deacons, but their ordination should be no different than male deacons. The campaign that's really growing at this moment is about the permanent diaconate. So you would just remain a deacon. Deacons can be married. Deacons can offer blessings, do a lot of the things that a priest can do, but not consecrate the Eucharist and a few other things that they're restricted to do. So it would be a ministry that many women already do around the world. There's a strong lobby for that to be recognized through an ordination.
Mhm.
We'll see what happens. This is a topic that has become more and more mainstream because, as we were talking about tradition, it's something that has already been done. Pope Francis's study commissions are really looking back into the history to see, was this a sacramental ordination or was it a blessing? They're looking for that historical precedent. But regardless of what happened in the past, the church today would benefit greatly from women deacons and women priests. And so it seems the right thing to do today. This is certainly a topic of the hour.
I share your concern about the church offering the diaconate as a sort of consolation prize, making it a terminal destination, and not opening the fullness of priestly ordination to women as well. Without attention to these ideas of complementarity and the issue of women's embodiment, unless they start addressing these very feminist issues, there is going to be a tendency to just say, well, you can do this, and that's enough for you, and you're still under the priest, and so the patriarchy is intact. Nothing's been rattled. I'm apprehensive, even as I hope it happens. I don't want it to feel like some kind of consolation prize that then they can walk away for another 500 years and say, well, we gave you that.
Exactly. Yes.
No, I do. I share your concern. In my mind, I struggle with impatience. It feels like, come on, it's either all or nothing. We're either equipped to be there as equals in Christ, or you're just not being fair. So you're much better at being diplomatic than I am.
Through our listening sessions, a theme that came forward was this sense of a prolonged Advent and really trusting in the synodal process. I think the great fruits have come through this discernment and including more and more voices. And for some people, it's this pregnant hope, a deep prayer. And for others, it feels like they're wandering in the wilderness and there's no hope. And so
Yeah.
waiting is hard. And I think a lot of people are hoping that something will shift this coming October, but the church doesn't move quickly. So it'll be interesting to see. There are changes that we can mark, but I'm not sure if there'll be the holistic changes that the church so desperately needs. I guess we'll see. And I think having women deacons, even if it is just having women on the altar in a recognized way, would ask more questions than it would answer. It would really lead people to continue to call for greater roles for women in the church. That's my prayer, that it wouldn't stop there, even if the church synod fathers have said that it would stop there.
It would be also very formative for younger women. Some of what we're concerned about is showing younger women that they have a place, as you say, at the altar, in the liturgy. And yes, that could be a very good thing. So I'd love to hear more from you about Women's Ordination Conference. We'd like to
Thank
add.
you so much. So, as I mentioned, the Women's Ordination Conference was founded in 1975. We had a conference in Detroit with 1,200 people attending. It was a very alive time. It was sort of the frontier of feminist theology. The questions that were asked at that first conference continue to carry us today. But it was really our foremothers at that conference that we're on the frontier of feminist theology, and we're asking the questions of who are these women who want to be ordained? Is it feminist to be ordained? Why should women be ordained? Those questions were relevant in 1975 and continue to be relevant today. So we carry those questions through our work. We like to think of our work in 3 ministries. The first ministry is called Walking with Women Called. So as you can imagine, we had our first conference in 1975 and we're talking in 2024. So there's been a lot of walking with women called over the decades. That's really a pastoral ministry. There's some movement chaplaincy that happens. It's a big part of our work. But this ministry is really affirming women in their vocations, celebrating the ways that they are able to, again, navigate around those really oppressive systems. Many of these women are or we're waiting for the institutional church to change, or are still waiting for those changes to happen. But it's a very tender ministry. So many women, we're not only walking with their call, but we're walking with the women that they know who are called, who want to be ministered to by women. So it's a very tender but rich ministry that we provide, and we offer resources, spiritual direction, retreats, all kinds of opportunities to discern. That's a big part of our work. The other ministry we have is called the Ministry of Prophetic Obedience, and that's supporting women who take steps towards ordination. So for whatever reason, they're not able to wait, for good reason, they don't have the patience to wait, and so are taking steps towards ordination. And this is where we offer a scholarship for women and non-binary people who are on a path to priesthood. We affirm their priesthood. We benefit from their ministry. They are a living model of renewed priesthood, and they are meeting the needs of the people of God. And so we celebrate their ministries as an important part of our work. And then our last ministry is everyone's favorite ministry and mine. It's the Ministry of Irritation. This is being the grain of sand in the oyster, working towards the pearl within. And this is where we get to really shine as activists and be creative and colorful and bold and ask this really old question in new ways. So this is my favorite ministry. I love thinking up really creative and prayerful but effective ways to advocate for women's ordination. That can look like all different things. So we've dropped banners off bridges in Rome. We have marched down the Via della Conciliazione towards St. Peter's with red parasols that had messages like sexism is a cardinal sin, or it's raining men, using those colorful images to point out the exclusion of women from high-level meetings. We've raised pink smoke over the Vatican during a conclave. In 2018, we witnessed outside the synod on youth that was happening, and the question of women voting was still a little bit on the outside of the mainstream. And so I organized a group of activists from all over, and we didn't have any signs, no colorful banners or parasols. We just came with our bodies as women, using our voices, and we thought that would be the most powerful witness. We came together and we read out the names of the cardinals and bishops who were walking into the synod hall, as if we see you, we see what you're doing. And then we had this chant that was, knock, knock, who's there? More than half the church. So we did that over and over again because they were closing the door and no women were voting. Even though there were women with the same canonical status as the men in the room, they were not granted a vote. The Vatican kept moving the goalposts as to why women couldn't. The reason is always sexism, but they kept coming up with new rules. But because of our action, the police came. I was grabbed. The photo was all over the news of me being grabbed by the police officers. The terrorism unit arrived on horseback for just a group of women using their voices, praying for their church. But because of that witness, this conversation became mainstream. At every press conference that whole month of the synod, the question of women voting at the synod came up. And by the end, cardinals, everyone was saying, I don't see why women can't. And that was in 2018. This is very fast in Vatican math years. A couple years later, Sister Natalie Picard was appointed an undersecretary to the synod office, a position that should hold a vote. And she was very coy for several months about whether she would vote or not. It's not about the vote, is what she would say. But eventually she confirmed that she would vote. And then we learned, of course, that 54 women were able to vote at the synod last October. So this is a real success for the Ministry of Irritation that literally started with women standing outside, calling attention to this injustice. And then just a few years later, a crack in the stained glass ceiling, women are voting at the synod. And so I use that as like an incredible success story of what it looks like when committed Catholics come together and raise their voices. The Ministry of Irritation is not always that rewarding, but very fun. We try to be creative and infuse a fierce tenderness and a joyful resistance into what we do, because it helps draw attention, but also we love our church. This is coming from a place of love. We love it even when it's broken. So we try to infuse our actions with that fierce tenderness and love as well.
It sounds like what St. Hildegard of Bingen would call a womanish time. when you get involved. So that's great. Do I remember something about some shoes? Were you
Yes.
behind putting shoes on the steps of the churches? That was just recently. Tell me about
Yeah,
that.
so annually we mark Vocation Sunday, which is the day that the institutional church prays for vocations, particularly to the priesthood, often invoking a priest shortage. We say there's no shortage of priests, there's a shortage of imagination and a crisis of sexism. And so last year we used the symbol of empty shoes around churches to symbolize all of the vocations of women unfulfilled, the women who have walked away, the fact that the church doesn't walk with these women. And so people got really excited. It was very creative. Everyone has a pair of shoes.
Yeah.
And so we got photos from all around the world. One church had a pile of shoes in front of the altar. Other people just had their single shoe that they put out there. But it was a very unifying witness. So this year, again, we're doing a witness on Vocation Sunday, which is April 22nd, with a theme, same baptism, same calling, same spirit. We'll be doing demonstrations again this year as well. We try to think of new ways and be creative with it.
If people want to watch out for how to be in the spirit of that event or how to participate in it where they are, would they go to your website to learn more about that? Or
Womensordination.org, and we have a toolkit that has a
great.
prayer resource, a prayer liturgy. We have graphics, posters, and we'll help connect people with local walk members so you can find your people really quickly in the local area.
It's very important that this becomes local and visible everywhere. It's one thing to have you advocating for us, but we really do need to irritate. I love the name of that ministry. That resonates for me.
Good.
It reminds me of the parable of the unrighteous judge and the woman who keeps coming to him, and he's finally like, "Ah, I'm gonna give her what she wants before she beats me," you know?
Exactly.
It's just
Exactly. Yep.
only I yet I can hear how deeply the principles of nonviolent resistance are important to everything you do as well, and I really respect that,
Thank
so
you.
that's really good. I can see the way your face lights
Yeah.
up. You're definitely doing God's work. This is what you are called to do. Not that I'm saying you're an irritating woman, not any more than we all need to be.
I like to be an effective activist.
I've come to that level of courage late in my life, and, yeah, I was raised up for
Mhm.
obedience and submission, and it took me a long time, but what made the difference for me was seeing and hearing women find their voices and, realizing that could be me.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's
great.
not for everyone, certainly, and there are risks involved. Just like women being ordained, they take on an enormous risk and isolation and pain. Yeah, so it's not for everyone. We've been
Yeah.
detained and arrested at the Vatican, and that's not something that
Yeah.
everyone wants or should do. But is a place for everyone in the movement. I want to reassure people. We have a
Good.
new program called the Wildflowers of the Grassroots, which is a reference to Saint Therese of Lisieux, her little flower. She actually called herself a little wildflower. And so we use that wilding the little flower idea to celebrate the very different and unique gifts that people bring to our work. We have different flower ministries, including sunflowers who point us towards educational resources, or the liturgical lilies. And so we really try to celebrate seasonal and voluntary, what you're able to give now in the movement. So all of those pieces are part of our ecosystem for change and are so necessary. You don't have to be arrested at the Vatican to be part of the Women's Ordination Conference. There is a place for you in the movement.
It really does come down to that spiritual connection, asking God what you were born to do and what is your call to serve. We are all different and have different capacities and gifts. The last thing I would like to talk about is something very dear to me because I was blessed with it last year. This is how I came to learn of your organization, Women's Ordination Conference, through the Lucille Murray Durkin Scholarship for Women Discerning Priestly Ordination. That's one of the ministries you are part of that you just mentioned. I can't say enough about how important that is for a woman who is sitting on that edge, trying to discern what it means to be Catholic, what is prophetic obedience, Sometimes you feel you don't have all the resources you need, whether they're educational or spiritual or financial. And it's made a huge difference in my life, and I'm very grateful I was selected for one of those awards. That's on your website, and we can repeat that URL. But when is the deadline for application here?
The deadline for the Lucille Murray Durkin Scholarship this year is April 29th. It's always on the feast of Catherine of Siena. It's really a privilege that the Women's Ordination Conference can offer this scholarship. We've been granting small financial scholarships since 2017. I think the total number of awardees, it's close to 25 who have received this award. And while it's a small financial award, what we hear from our awardees is that the affirmation of their call is the biggest gift. Being included in a community that affirms that call is truly invaluable, especially in a church that has rejected or marginalized or tried to stifle a call. So it's a real privilege. We get to read so many applications that come in each year and hear the stories that are similar. Women on a path to discernment, looking for ways to serve their church, using their gifts, reimagining what priesthood can look like. A big part of the path towards ordination today for many women is, what does renewed priesthood look like? And so we get to hear incredible testimonies. The scholarship is $2,200 from the Durkin Dirks family, a woman priest who passed away last year. Her family endowed it. She was ordained through the Ecumenical Catholic Community, the ECC, but had a call to priesthood as a very young girl. This was a huge joy in her life, something that we get to carry on in her memory and her mother's memory. Lucille Murray Durkin was a woman ahead of her time, calling for the greater inclusion of women in the church. And so we do have a history of Lucille and her family and Sheila Dirks, who endowed the scholarship. But honestly, it's a privilege for us, and it's something we love to offer. So it's primarily offered to Catholic women and non-binary people, but it's also open to people of other denominations. The application process has evolved over the years, so it doesn't necessarily have to be an essay. It can be a video recording, an audio file, a piece of art, however you want to express your ministry and your vocational path. That would be welcome as well.
It's been a blessing for me. And one of the greatest parts of it was to be seen, to be taken seriously, and to receive that blessing. That, yes, we believe that what you're experiencing is valid and we want to support you. That was huge for me. This has been wonderful. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I just want to say that we are still in the midst of the synodal process. I know as the election in the US continues to stir things up, that may take people's attention away, but the synod is an important moment in the church and we're living through it. So I want to say we are continuing that journey with authenticity and courage. We want to bring as much accountability to the process as possible. So we will be in Rome again this year, planning several events and demonstrations, and bringing our uncompromising witness for women's ordination back to the Vatican again. So please follow the Women's Ordination Conference on social media. We're at Ordain Women on most platforms. We do a lot of content on social media, but that's the best way to hear about our demonstrations, our actions, and how to get involved.
Very good. Check it out, everybody. This is very important work. The church needs women. We're already doing probably 80% of the work. Come on. Thank you so much, Kate. You've been a delightful guest. I hope to chat with you again. Maybe I can have you come back after the synod and we can talk some more about that. You're willing.
I'd love to come back. You know where to find me.
Great. I do. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Mad Catholic.
Catholic is sustained by the grace of God and the communion of saints. Say your prayers, kids, and until next time, give heartfelt thanks to God.